filmmaker, and you're listening to the Eastern Kicks podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Eastern Kicks podcast, a regular magazine programme about East Asian film led by me, Andrew Heskins, founder and grandmaster of EasternKicks.com, and James Mudge, our leading writer.
Hey up.
Each episode we'll be taking a look at the latest films, news and festivals, often chatting to filmmakers and stars along the way. Welcome to the latest episode. This time we're going to focus on Filipino filmmaker Mikhail Red, best known for Birdshot, Eerie and Delita. I caught up with him recently while we were both at the Udine Far East Film Festival for a chat, which Delita was also screening. Meanwhile, James and I will also have a chat about that film and his career so far. But before we get on to that, we've always got that important question to answer. What are you drinking this episode, James?
Something very nice. Got a nice bottle of the old Pulteney, 12 years old.
Ooh.
A very nice whiskey. Well, I'm just drinking. I haven't been drinking beer this year, and I've stuck to it. But I've been upping my whiskey quality a little bit. I like Bell's and stuff still, but when there's no taste to it, you end up drinking it too much, like too quickly, and drinking too much of it because you don't really, there's not much of anything to it. And if you mix soda with it, which I was doing as well, you don't even notice what you're drinking. So this way, you get a very strong tasting malt, and then you don't swallow it down so quickly or anything like that. So that's my excuse for having better whiskey. But what have you got?
I'm on a trusty Leffe.
No, okay.
This episode.
You cannot go wrong with that, man.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
So on with the show. We'll get on to the interview with Mikhail later on, but it'd be kind of interesting to chat about Mikhail and his career so far. Just kind of give a bit of background to him. He is the eldest son of Raymond Red, who himself was a Palme d'Or short film winner at the 2000 Cannes Film Festival for Annio. And he kind of very much followed in the family footsteps, and I think all his family seem to be involved in.
They do, yes. yeah. It's just
Nicholas is directly involved with quite a few of these films, and Ray Red's involved.
Ray Red, yes, yeah, that's right. It's first time I Birdshot was the first one of his I saw, and I remember seeing the credits and seeing it was quite a family affair, which is good and nothing. Nothing wrong with that at all. But it's interesting, and I guess, as you say, like coming from his father as well, it does seem like a nice family business going through the generations almost, which is pretty cool.
So, he was his first film, Recorder. I don't know if you've seen that one from 2013.
Yes, I have not for quite a long time, but I've seen Recorder with the video piracy and the filming stuff and everything. Very, very interesting film, and I think not just because of their titles, but there is some tie-in or thematic, maybe kind of tie-in with Delita to an extent. But we'll talk about that later. But Recorder is a very interesting debut. He did a few shorts first, but I've not seen any of his shorts, to be honest, because we don't really get access to stuff like that unless we really track them down online. But no, it was a very, very interesting first feature and a very interesting jump from that to Birdshot, which is a very different kind of film.
That's the first one I was absolutely the first time I saw of his, and it's just it is such a great movie, and it's
such a mature film, I guess, because we can mention his age. Pretty young as a director, and I think.
I seem to remember your review being quite annoyed that he was only about 24 or 25.
Yeah, I was right. I was quite shocked. I felt right aggrieved.
He's about 31 now. So that
okay, well, it's slightly, but I think
quite a few films under his belt though.
No, I think it's fine. The difference between Recorder and Birdshot is such. It's not that there's a huge jump in quality because they're both really good films, but Birdshot is such a assured, not slick production, but you know what I mean? It's such a well constructed, put together. Whereas Recorder feels more like a bit more raw, a bit more like indie and everything. And the difference between that and Birdshot, it's a very big leap, I guess. Without, I don't mean like step forward as such, because I think Recorder is a great film, but I think the difference between that and Birdshot, despite them not being too far apart, even like time wise, it's a very big.
There's 3
jump.
years, which is actually more than.
It's not too much.
No. I'm not. I mean, I mean, if you go into Korean years, it's a bit like dog years, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Or if we compared it to old school Hong Kong directing, that's an eternity, 3 years. But yeah, it's just interesting to see the evolution and the change, because Birdshot is such a mature film. You know, you could imagine that having been made by a director who's been in the industry for like 10, 20 years or something. Yeah,
definitely. And then he followed that up with Neo Melina, which is a kind of pseudo kind of contemporary set, a thriller. And I mean, what those 2 films have is that they are very, very dark. I almost want to use a word like gritty, but they're you know, and that's not the right word, but they are very dark. They're very grim. They're
quite grounded. Yeah, they're quite grounded, and they kind of mix quite sort of cynical take on like social issues in with sort of genre. And that was one of the things which impressed me so much about Birdshot, because with Recorder, and I think to an extent with Neo Manila, they feel a bit more like indie, edgy type stuff. But when you see it in Birdshot, it's very much grappling with some of these social issues quite openly, and in a sort of very grounded way though. And I think that's why for these early films, he has a really interesting mix of dealing with like social criticism, social issues, but mixing it in with genre. You know, whether it's thriller or something a bit more not art house, but existential, I guess, with Recorder. So very very interesting start to the career in the way he was combining that stuff so successfully and confidently. I would say usually when young directors, and seeing how young he was then, usually when they get into this stuff, first time or young directors can be really like ham-fisted with metaphor or social themes and working stuff in there and everything. But he never had that problem with his early films.
And then I mean, we're going to go through this kind of quite briskly, I think. You know, and then kind of the big kind of studio films, so Eerie and Dead Kids, which I think are partly Netflix produced, or at least that released. They were produced. I mean, because Birdshot was the first Filipino film sold to Netflix globally. I never quite know what that means, because there's been other Filipino stuff on there, but it was some kind of milestone. And then his next films were another milestone in terms of Netflix being the first Filipino ones where Netflix was actually involved in the production. So of course they went straight to Netflix, which was great, because they got, usually films like that would probably only play at festivals, and probably quite specific Asian festivals. So a lot more people got to see them, got exposed to his films as a result of the Netflix thing, which is, we always see all these debates back and forth about how good Netflix is or bad Netflix is, but people tend to focus those debates on stuff like, Scorsese films like Irishman or whatnot and everything. So, and they focus on this idea, well, this should have been a piece of cinema. But the good side about the Netflix stuff really is that some of these films like this, which never realistically would have got more than maybe a couple of brief festival screenings in the UK, where it was suddenly on Netflix, and so many people could have seen them. And we might have struggled to see like Eerie or Dead Kids and stuff if they hadn't been on there, or even Birdshot itself. So I think it's great that they were on there. Great that Netflix was investing in production in other countries, and also just making directors' works more available widely. So, but they were both Netflix productions or co-productions. In that respect, Eerie and Dead Kids. And again, we saw like another, they're both different. Eerie being a horror film and Dead Kids being like a sort of contemporary zeitgeist thriller type thing. Again, interesting step forwards or progression or development from his earlier works. Especially Eerie, because it's a bit of a strange mix without diving into it too much. Because on the one hand, the horror elements in it are quite generic, I think you could say, with Eerie, but
the social side of it and the visual side of it are very, very strong. So you kind of marry a pretty standard modern Asian ghost story type of thing with a bit of sort of Western horror, with a bit of old like Val Newton type of stuff to it. But it's very predictable sort of horror. But at the same time, the other aspects of the film are really rich. Then with Dead Kids, again, it's more like a Recorder or Neo Manila type of thing. With some kidnapping thing gone wrong, but again with more social themes brought in. So it's quite an interesting sort of jump around. It'd be interesting just to know like how they developed these things with Netflix, how much they were, what kind of involvement Netflix actually had in terms of shaping them, because they don't. Eerie feels more like one which was maybe shaped for the global audience, I guess, compared to, because Dead Kids is a bit more specific. I mean, I don't think Netflix really cares about that, to be honest, but of the two films, Eerie feels more like intended for wider consumption. I guess like that, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, and I quite like Eerie. It would have been a nice one to see on the big screen, because it is quite a beautiful, dark visuals in the film. It's just that it's just a bit generic in terms of the plot itself. Yeah,
but and the other thing that's quite nice about it is, and I think works in its defence as well, is that it's got it's the characterisation as well that you get in there that is pretty strong. That you go along with the characters, and then you are more concerned about what happens to them, even if the frights feel it could be feel a bit predictable.
Yeah.
There's one interesting thing I noticed in those, and I almost kind of watching those two films recently in quite quick succession, is that I don't know if it's a deliberate kind of Easter egg or something, but there's a line in both of those films.
Oh, really?
That's kind of almost exactly the same. So. In Eerie, and they're all in the same context of being bullied in a sort of school environment.
That's true, yeah.
But one of the characters says, "They killed me every day," and I mean, in Dead Kids, it's I died every day, and I just wanted, I was kind of wanted to kind of skim through and see if he kind of worked that line in somewhere.
That's true. Maybe it's in Deleter somewhere as well. I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a very similar line in Deleter actually with the repetitiveness. But we'll come to that in a second. So kind of he's kind of building this strong back catalogue. There's Block Z, which I haven't seen.
I haven't seen it. That never came out for us in the West. Didn't play any festivals. Didn't turn up on like Amazon, Netflix, or anything like that, which was a shame. Because there's a zombie horror type wannabe Filipino take on it. Would have definitely liked to see it. So, but no, it just didn't turn up. Didn't turn up anywhere. I mean, bit of a surprise.
And then Arisaka, which was 2021.
Yeah.
And that brings us on to Deleter.
Hindi ka ba naniniwala sa kabilang buhay? Huwag kang mag-alala. Pag nauna ako, sabihin ko sa'yo.
Lara, anong nangyari sa'yo?
Yung video na kinuhanan mo nung namatay si Eileen, nasa'yo pa ba?
Ano ba talaga nangyayari?
Which has been doing absolute kind of has been very successful in the domestic box office, and it's been travelling to lots of festivals. Had a limited cinema release in the States, and is due to be released on Amazon Prime later in the year, I believe. Which is an interesting. It was an interesting kind of step in terms of there's one of the films that Amazon have picked up. There's another Filipino film, In My Mother's Skin, by Kenneth Agatan as well. Which is,
I'd quite like to see that one too. Yeah,
and but it's interesting to see Amazon kind of step into this area and start picking up these films that
they will have to. Yeah, they'll have to drastically improve their search engine then, because I guarantee you can imagine like Deleter arriving, being on there, and then going and searching for Filipino films, and it wouldn't bring it up. I can guarantee that at the moment. I mean, Amazon is just absolutely useless for searching anything on there. At least with Netflix, you might have to be a bit proactive, but you can find stuff. If you just type in Filipino films, because there was quite a few other ones Netflix picked up by other directors and sort of horror genre stuff as well. So if Amazon does start picking up more of this kind of stuff, it would be good. Just hope they will not sort of hide and bury them and make them very, very difficult to even search for, which I fear they might. I
don't think it's deliberate. I think it's just that's what Amazon is. I mean, they use their same search engine that they use for their products, and that often you're much better off going into Google and then putting in Amazon as part of your search word, and then back.
Absolutely. If you know what you're looking for, you can usually find it. If you don't,
then browsing is just a
it's a waste of time on Amazon, unfortunately. So hopefully they'll. I don't know. Somehow they'll get the word out that Deleter's coming on the platform, so it doesn't get buried. Because as we were saying, I mean, that's one of the good things about his stuff being on Netflix is actually just reaching a wider audience. So we'll see what Amazon do. I won't hold my breath, but
so Deleter is based around someone that works on this service that's been outsourced to the Philippines. It was, and I talked about this with Mikhail as well, that there was a really good documentary that in the UK was on Storyville a couple of years ago, called, I think it's called The Cleaners, but the longer title is Internet's Dirty Little Secrets. Very good documentary that actually was really balanced, looking at the kind of the pressures of people, kind of outsourcing to people in the Philippines, having to go through all this kind of content, and then the sort of the reaction to some of that content, which is coming from all sorts of perspectives and weird, because it's not being done by any kind of AI, it's being done by some poor person who's having to go through all this. And
would not like that job, no.
And that's where we find ourselves with Deleter. That's where we start with a person. And
yeah, I mean, I guess we'll end up touching on some vague spoilers. Maybe we don't need to say the specifics of the plot, but just in the cut and the thrust of it. I suspect we'll get into a bit, but it's an interesting setup, and again, it's sort of quite rooted in social themes, as you say, about these things being outsourced to these data centers, and the data checking and the video checking being outsourced to places like the Philippines. And obviously, it's kind of focusing on the dehumanizing effects it has on people. I mean, partly in terms of the content that they're actually having to see and stuff, but partly just I think it's just the monotony of it as well, and the idea of not quite the same as a call center, but that kind of thing. You're just sitting there doing this, unpleasant job for another country on the other side of the world. We're just sitting there like clicking through, click, 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 click. Because it doesn't really get into too much of the content as much as it might have, I guess, because some of the stuff they're watching is probably very unpleasant. So I think it's kind of more the social theme of it rather than like the visceral side in terms of suddenly seeing anything, too horrific on that side of things. But no, it's an interesting setup for it, and it's interesting. And the main character is a bit different, I guess, because she's not very likable. In the film, I mean, she's kind of sympathetic, but she is kind of going through that process of dehumanization, I guess, and she's very sort of self-focused, and it's not
and detached from I'm kind of getting into the story too much, but one of this, when this deeply affects one of her other co-workers, she is actually kind of not admitting to herself, let alone anyone else, exactly how close she was to this person, because she's going through that dehumanizing process. Absolutely, and it's an interesting setup, and it's very effective, I think, in the earlier stages of the film where we're building up into that. It's quite creepily shot. I guess everything is quite dark and grey, and it presents an interesting view kind of the city. I assume it's Manila, right? the city, right? But it's quite an interesting visual way of doing it. And then the sort of world of just being in these office, in the dark,
everyone's sitting in the dark so much in that film, like clicking through the videos and everything like that.
And part of that, I think one thing, it's actually done quite well in that sense, that it was just all still under kind of strict COVID conditions, so to get away with it not being that not being too obvious on screen, I think was
no, it's it's not an easy time to have been shooting anything. So yeah, it's got a very interesting setup and sort of social context to it. But I think kind of like eerie for me, I think when we get into kind of away from the context and into the actual plot itself, it's a little bit generic. I think in terms of that, I think it marries some very, very interesting social themes, and at some points in the film, like I thought it was going down like a Brandon Cronenberg route. Especially some stuff towards the end of it, I thought it was going a bit Possessor type of way. But that might just be the name, like, and that maybe that's why I linked recorder to deleter, Possessor. Just a lot of ER films, but there's something about this. Something about it, I was just getting a sense that it was not an entirely successful marriage of some, I guess not quite art house, but some more really quite interesting stuff in there, and dealing with the social themes, but at the same time working in like a pretty commercial sort of film plot, which is it's not really, I suppose that's not really criticism. As you said, it's been such a big success in the Philippines, so it was, it is a commercial film in that respect. I think it's more just when you're watching it, because some of the social stuff in it, and some of this whole idea of dehumanizing and identity and blurring of reality, I think it deals with in a really interesting way. And then it has a kind of need to resolve things or to move things forward, so it goes into a fairly generic kind of plot as to what it's actually not what it's all about, but what actually drives it is a pretty generic setup, I think. Doesn't make it any less entertaining. It's still a good film, but I think when I was watching it, part of me thought it was going to go in a different direction. Without getting into spoilers on it. But,
we are trying to keep those spoilers.
No. I mean that's enough of a spoiler. That's enough of a spoiler already to say that to people and everything. But so I think it'll depend on the viewer, I guess as well. Like if you're going to this as like more of a kind of popcorny film, but then again, it's not massively a horror film in that respect. I mean, there's some scares and stuff in it, and a few flashes of, I guess, surreal stuff, but it's not really that kind of scare horror film. A lot of it is quite sort of slow burn and and that, which is why I thought it was going to go in a different direction. So yeah, it's an interesting mix of stuff, and it's good that it's been very, very popular, and it's a shame that it hasn't had more of a wide thing in the West. But maybe this will be more of a flagship one, not flagship, but one that Amazon actually push. And actually get out there properly. So, but it's been good to see it playing at stuff like Udine, and getting out there more.
And the other interesting thing, which you'll hear during the interview as well, is that I did ask him if Mikhail, if he had to make any concessions, and it seemed that the only concessions he had to make was to have it to the stars. To the lead star of this.
Yes.
So, and if that's a concession, I mean,
that's not much.
It's if you're having a big star in your film, and that's the concession you're making, then, which Nadine Lustre is.
Yes.
That's not gonna. It is a help. It's not a hindrance. And I think the other thing that's actually in this, and was also obvious from reading up about the lead actresses in My Mother's Skin, is that they are very well known, very glamorous actresses who are quite happy to be in these more interesting films that aren't rom-coms, that aren't something that is that where they are quite playing very kind of stereotypical roles. It's not. Yeah. They're really very, very happy to be in these kind of roles. So it's kind of the sort of genre cinema is kind of meeting these super.
No, absolutely.
It's been really helpful for these young directors who are doing this stuff.
No, absolutely, and yeah, absolutely. My sort of criticism or what I'm saying about Delete is me coming at it from a different direction. I guess it's not coming at it as a more commercial film, which is going out in the cinema, has been very successful. Sort of mixing that with what is quite an interesting and could have been sort of multi-layered subject matter and context for it and everything. So yeah, I mean, I think it's never an easy thing to do to mix that, you know, when you have the basis. And it's interesting what you say about that documentary having a really interesting sort of grounded, quite sinister basis for the film, but needing to marry that to having a star and the expectations that comes with that, and having a slightly more like traditional commercial story sort of based into it. So and it's good that he still manages to keep quite a few surreal and quite odd bits in it, especially at the very end, because it does have a very cool final bit at the very end for it. So yeah, I think my criticisms just come from thinking it was going in it was going to continue in a more surreal way, because it is quite ambiguous and obscure in a very nice way for the first half of it, I think. And then it just goes into... It's not that it goes off the rails by any means. It just goes into more standard territory, I guess, for the plot. But then, you know, you couldn't have really kept going without some kind of narrative framework to hang things on to. So fair enough. I'll definitely watch it again if I can find it on Amazon.
So I caught up with Mikhail in a particularly echoey corner of the main theatre for the Udine Far East Film Festival in April. Let's kind of start with the main question, which is, where did you get your inspiration for Delita? What was that?
So we started, I guess the concept and the development started around the pandemic. So we were all stuck at home, and everyone was, I guess, seeing the world through their screens, through all the filters and distortion, and you know, it got me thinking. Everything we see online, everything we post, someone has to be filtering all that. Someone has to be moderating it. And I've heard of the occupation before.
Yeah. Of
social media content moderators, and it so happened that when we did our research, that Manila is becoming like the social media content moderator.
It's another thing that's being outsourced to.
Yeah,
basically.
And most of those types of jobs are being outsourced in Manila, and with the work from home setups, it's becoming easier. And it's a fairly new job because of, the advent of technology and the internet.
There's a really interesting documentary I saw a few years back.
The Cleaners.
The Cleaners,
I saw that. And there was also the Vice documentary and interviews, and there's so many news articles that published research on the content moderators, the cleaners or the deleters, and eventually I had to work with Viva Films, and they're now one of the more active film studios in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And they were looking for ideas, mostly genre concepts that you could shoot safely. That's very feasible and contained, and something that you could shoot with the new protocols, because everyone was still getting used to shooting.
So it's still done under COVID protocols. Yeah.
And I guess it all kind of snapped together. This is something we were always fascinated by, and we felt like it would be a good jumping off point for a horror film. And it's something that you could do because it's pretty contained, pretty claustrophobic.
Yeah.
You have a character staring at her screen, and in a way, I felt like it was very similar to my first movie, Recorder, where where it's also multi-format. It's very modern in its approach. But this time, I was really into horror. I was doing horror films, so I felt like that would be the best genre, the best vehicle to tell this story, and to kind of introduce it to a larger audience. You know, the local audience who probably wouldn't normally see a documentary, but you know, would see a fiction film, and this is something that could highlight this subject for them. And so yeah, we got to work even with my producer Jason. She went into the deep web and was able to interview some of the content moderators, and you know, we got to interview some of them anonymously, and formed this story called Deleter, about this desensitized content moderator who basically, you know, because of all the things she sees in her screen, she becomes apathetic, and then eventually something happens where she has to basically unmask herself and face the reality she's always been tolerating. You know. So yeah, it's because Filipinos are still very spiritual. You know, we're very into ghost stories. We're very religious. So I like the combination of something that deals with technology, something very modern, and still have that, you know, that ghost story. And that, I think that unique blend kind of worked for when we did like our local release. It got good results. It was one of them. I think it's the highest grossing horror movie in the Philippines history.
Really?
And we were so surprised because we never thought we would ever surpass like the results of like the films pre-COVID. And that's where we realized that it was really the viewing habits of the Filipinos changed during the pandemic. Everyone was watching streaming, watching a lot of Black Mirror and Squid Game, and I think it fits well with the generation that, you know, grew up with like TikTok, where everything you watch, you know, you go through it so fast, like all that information, all that attention span is different, and it kind of reflects the job of the social media content moderators, where they just flick through videos.
I thought it's quite an interesting rhythm to that, though, because these things are quite abstract. It almost starts to feel like the cursed video in Ring. You know, it's got that kind of aspect. Were you kind of thinking about that side of things as well?
Of course, yeah. I'm a big fan of J horror, Japanese horror, and a lot of it, you know, is definitely inspiration. But at the same time, I like to add the reality happening in the Philippines. So even though, you know, most content moderators, they deal with, you know, big international sites, you know, in our film, the milieu, the things you see in the news, the things happening around our country, you kind of see the glimpses and fragments of it in Lyra's, you know, job. Yeah. And it's almost like she gets used to it, to the point that when something horrific is happening in front of her, she phases out because she's so numb to what's going on. So yeah.
I mean, there's a big. I mean, in the UK we had it as well, but like people get desensitized to things. So in the UK, people started to get desensitized to COVID. The thing is, COVID deaths, you know, because it was it was being reported all the time that it didn't mean anything anymore. So it was kind of weird desensitization that we've had. Is that sort of side of social commentary quite important to the films you do? Because it feels like that's something you have in there quite often. Yeah.
I feel like there's that, well, not just responsibility or opportunity, but I think that's the key with some of at least the films I make. Like, I have that chance to reach a larger audience. I mean, especially with the movies I make, luckily are backed by studios that have that marketing capability. It interests a lot of big artists who usually do like the mainstream, like for example, romantic comedies and dramas, and they want to do something different. They go into horror, they go into these genre projects, and for them it's something fresh and challenging. So with those components, I'm very lucky that these are the type of films that even if we do get festival traction, back home it's pretty good in terms of like viewership. We get like a good theatrical release. It reaches people outside the film bubble, that echo chamber of like film industry and filmmakers. It reaches your average audience, and I think that's like a good opportunity to, like I said, to highlight certain subjects that they probably wouldn't think about or encounter, because it's not something they're used to seeing in a commercial movie, at least back home. And it feels different, like when you see average audience and moviegoers talk about the film online. You see discussions, and I think that's what kind of helped the film, because we weren't so strong during the opening week, because normally it's the family movies that do well, like the rated G, where you can bring, because Filipinos have big families, everyone should be able to watch the same film, right, during Christmas or holidays. But this one was an R-rated movie. It had sensitive subject matter. It had suicide. But it started to gain that traction because of the discourse, because people felt it was different. The ending was ambiguous and it was mysterious. And I guess also the fact that a popular actress who's always glammed up and does like romance is suddenly slicing her face off. You know what I mean? Like there's this intrigue and this freshness to it that a lot of the audience started to talk about it online. And if you didn't want to be left out of the conversation, like you had to watch it, and then people would watch it more than once. And I think that's very interesting. It's a good. That's where I realize where it's a good, I guess, tool. If I can smuggle that subtext in, but still make it very entertaining for the average audience. I think that's always been my philosophy as a filmmaker, and it helps. It makes it very sustainable, because the movie, gains enough in terms of viewership that we're able to make more. And now we set up a new company because of Deleter, because of the success of Deleter. We set up a company, a production called Evolve Studios. So some of the capital is from Viva, but it's my first time to own a company, and we get to do more genre films. And some of these films I will only be producing now, so I can support newer voices, newer filmmakers, and with the focus on genre cinema in the Philippines.
So I was going to ask you. It's great that setting up your own company. Have you felt that you've had to make concessions when working with studios to what you do, or are you left?
Realistically, the biggest adjustment you always have to make is casting. But I don't mind that, because I work with a lot of great, very talented actors, actresses, and these are people who want to also step up their game. Like I said, they probably do a lot of the more audience-friendly drama, romance, commercials and TV shows for their bread and butter. But this is new for them, when they do a film where that's not typically, your audience crowd pleaser. It's an R-rated movie. It excites them, and they're very passionate about it. Sometimes they even, volunteer more of their time, and I appreciate that. So I guess, at least in the Philippines, that's one big factor. When you do something for a bigger audience, the cast, of course, I think in most countries matters a lot. But in terms of the creative control and genre, I'm very pleased to say that Viva let us do our thing. That's great. I think it's because we were very lucky that we got to build like a good filmography in the past, and they were familiar with our work before they decided to collaborate. So they didn't meddle much, and now that it worked, at least on a financial perspective from them, they'll probably let us do more. Like, just keep doing that as long as it works.
Yeah.
On their end. So that's good for us because we can be creative and still have that machinery, because it helps to advertise something for theatrical. It's hard because otherwise you just go straight to streaming nowadays.
Yeah.
But if you have the backing of a studio, you get to put billboards, or you get to put free TV spots, and that's how you get like normal, regular audiences to go out of their way and pay for a ticket, go to a cinema. And it's hard in a third world country. The ticket prices cost more than a meal, and everyone, the working class, the middle class is quite small in the Philippines. So you really have to make it worth their money and their time. So it's hard without the backing of a major company to put your film out there for them to see. Otherwise, you'll be gone in like a few days in the cinema. And there's gonna be a Marvel movie or a Hollywood movie that will eat you up in the Philippines. So it's pretty rare, and that's why it was a miracle for us what happened with The Leader.
It sounds like it really kind of caught the zeitgeist. In terms of, I mean, your family has. You're very involved in the sort of film and TV industry. What have you seen change? In you've been a filmmaker, feature film for a decade now.
So many things have changed. For example, ABS-CBN was shut down, and they were very active pre-pandemic. Like, we had stuff going on with them. We were supposed to do like a prequel for Eerie. They were I was so excited because, coming from an independent background, most of my earlier films we had to produce using soft money and grants. But eventually when studios like ABS-CBN, who usually do the big audience-friendly romance and drama, saw the potential of genre and of thrillers and horror, they were already taking risks. That's why we signed up to do a couple of movies with them. But pandemic happened, so it shut down. Shooting hours changed. We used to do more, now it's very strict, very tight. Almost 12 to 14 hours now. We used to do more in the Philippines. And shooting days also are a bit tighter. That's why concepts like The Leader, it's starting to go back to normal now, but during the time of The Leader, you had to think of ideas that you could do safely with the new protocols and in a number of a certain span of shooting days. So you need experience for that. So during that time, I was so lucky that we were able to get in before the gates closed in a way, because I can imagine it must be harder for a new filmmaker to come in now that a lot of financiers at this platform are more risk averse because of the pandemic. Everything's, there's less audience, there's less. So we felt the change. Like, things got smaller for a while, but we're relentless, we're passionate. You'll always find a way to make a film or tell a story. So we found those ways to think of concepts that would work. And now it's starting to slowly get back to normal. Theatrical since December has slowly been moving, and streamers are now more aggressive. Instead of just Netflix, before you didn't really have an option, at least in our country it's just Netflix. Now Disney Plus came in, HBO, and Amazon Prime Video has been very aggressive. In fact,
and then buying Kenneth.
And The Leader is also Amazon.
Oh, they've got Amazon as well.
Yeah.
Because I was going to ask,
So
that's interesting. I guess on the international side of things, that suddenly again, like for me, I'm being quite old. I remember the 2000s and how much interest there was, and you had J-horror, but then that started to branch out and had stuff in Thailand. I think for a much lesser degree, things were coming out of the Philippines. But now it's all starting to happen again with your stuff. But you've got like Joe Conwar and Indonesia and all that side of stuff, and there is a real appetite. You kind of see that as something that's grow.
And streaming has helped a lot. In fact, even as early as Eerie, that's when I felt more international attention. I mean, I've been making films even before Eerie, like very proud of like Recorder and Birdshot. Eerie went Netflix worldwide, and that's when we got attention of US, a lot of publications. And in fact, I got my agent because of Eerie, not Birdshot, because they're more into it's a bit more audience friendly. It's horror, a bit more universal. So yeah, because of streaming, there's more visibility. I guess instead of I enjoy the film festival circuit, but with streaming, it's almost like your archive. You're constantly showing. It's as easy as someone liking your film and then sharing a link or a hashtag.
Yeah.
Someone else clicks on it and sees your film. So you always see a fresh reaction every now and then to a film that's already been there for quite a while. So that helped a lot. At least I noticed the visibility and attention when we first started releasing worldwide through the streaming platforms. So yeah, that's a big change, but still the theatrical experience is still different, and that's why I'm quite proud when we were able to do almost like a comeback with Deleted, because my previous film Arisaka, that was straight right after the pandemic, so there was nothing, no cinemas. We got into festivals in Tokyo and Cairo and LA, but no one could fly out. So that was tough, for Arisaka, but we got it on Netflix, but there's not a lot of options. So with the Dieter, when we tried to do a theatrical, and we didn't expect much because we thought people are just slowly starting to come back, but that's where we saw it could still happen and it could still work, and that was exciting. But yeah, I think that's the biggest change, and I think that's what brought attention to our region and our cinema when we started gaining the attention of the streamers, and they started getting us for original labels, even with Dead Kids, the Netflix original. I saw quite some attention on that and a lot of curiosity. So it helped a lot, and we tried to maintain a good relationship with them. But sometimes it's better to do both theatrical and then go to streaming after.
Yeah.
But I guess it depends on the film. It depends on the topic.
But I think there's lots of stuff that is better to see on a big screen,
course,
and in some ways, say, I don't know what will happen with the Lisa, but something like Satan's Slaves Communion, for instance, from Joe, got in the UK and the US, it went to Shudder very quickly.
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad I waited to see it here on the
We
big screen.
did a theatrical actually in the US in January, February with Deleted, but just a few cinemas, maybe 30 cinemas or something. But usually when we do stuff like that, it's mostly the Filipinos also go support. I saw some reactions from American publications on Deleted. But the thing with the local studios sometimes is they rarely work with an international distributor because they already have their own infrastructure, and they kind of target the Filipino diaspora abroad. But sometimes you have to convince them that there are other options. In fact, they're not really into the whole festival circuit, and it's really just us filmmakers pushing them. Hey, we want to take this film to festivals, because then they already know they have their system already.
It's the way to get kind of internationally known and get a name in that sense, isn't it?
So I keep reminding them that we still want to do this. We still want to go to the festival circuit, even though simultaneously you're already selling it to streamers or doing commercial releases in certain territories. The few premieres that we have left, we try to still get to a festival. It's still a different experience. My cinematographer and producer is their first time actually in a festival, and it really opens your mind that there's so much more than just our industry. And, it's inspirational for us to keep making.
So, what are you working on next? What have you got in the pipeline?
So now, actually, in the middle of May, we're going to Hong Kong to shoot some scenes, because we're working on a very exciting new genre. It's my least cynical film. It's a sports movie, but it's in video games, esports. So it's about an underdog Filipino esports team focused on a female player, in a very male-dominated sports industry. But imagine the handicap in the third world with all the slow internet service and lag and cheap keyboards and mouse. So she grew up in this internet cafe culture. You know, it's almost like a street ball of esports. And then she's recruited by a Philippine team. And then they have this big, underdog story where she rises and then goes to a very big international tournament abroad. So we have scenes in Hong Kong that we're shooting. It's called Friendly Fire. So it's a different, like I said, I always like to try different genres because I want the project to be exciting to me as well. I want to try something new and to the artists and to the sound. I like it when we're trying to pioneer something or do something fresh, at least in our region. It excites the audience, it excites us, and it's so fun to go to work, to go to set when you're trying something new. So this one is more like a sports movie, but very new with the whole gaming industry growing. So it's called Friendly Fire.
Yeah.
And if you want, we can in Eastern Tips we can send you exclusive like the first look stills.
That'd be great.
Stills,
yeah, that'd be out. Absolutely
so
awesome.
we'll probably come out with this film like end of year. So because the post will take a while. We have an actual video game, a Filipino-made video game.
An actual original video game.
We can't announce the game's name yet, but we also want to spotlight that Philippines, a lot of game development is outsourced to us, and even VFX. So it's very Filipino in that sense, and we want to show that that side of us to the world. So it's exciting, something new, because I've done like a couple of horror films in a row, so now it's a sports movie, more wholesome.
That's fantastic.
Friendly Fire.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. And you can see those exclusive shots that Mikhail mentioned right now on the website and our social feeds. Just search for easternkicks.com, and you'll also find a link with the podcast details for this episode. So, I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing what Mikhail does with a sports underdog drama. And, if anyone's going to turn it on their head, it's going to be him, and doing it in a sort of esports, first-person shooter type way.
Yeah, definitely.
Working exclusively with like a big-name game, Filipino name game that he's working with on there. I mean, it's really... It's a nicely kind of pro-Filipino kind of nice little skit. And I mean, also what he was talking about there, where he's working to create his own studio with the Filipino media giant Viva Films, who he worked with Delita as well. So again, to kind of create this kind of foundation, it's really quite it's very cool. Kind of thing to be doing, to kind of take this
absolutely
and create a real foundation for filmmakers. And
absolutely, it's building towards something sustainable, and you giving other people a way into it and stuff. I mean, it's coming from his background, we said like the family in the industry and working, his father being in there, everything like that. It just seems like a very cool thing to be doing, to be moving forwards with this kind of thing, making things sustainable, chances for the future. I mean, obviously for his own career, but then also giving chances to other people and sort of building things up in this way, which should really bolster the Filipino industry, and hopefully like the genre of filmmaking in particular, especially given his success at getting stuff on, working with Netflix now, stuff on Amazon, getting stuff out to the festivals, having big hits at home. So it's fascinating, and it's good to see someone like with a bigger picture, I guess. Like it's great. I mean, if you're making films anyway, that's very cool already. But actually, there's a filmmaker, and then there's somebody who's also trying to be involved in other aspects of the industry in terms of moving things forward, which is interesting to see. And I would certainly be well up for seeing more sort of Filipino genre films in the future. If that's what they end up churning out more of, I'd be very happy about that.
that's it for now. Don't forget you can find all of our previous episodes on Apple, Amazon Music, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe now and you'll never miss an episode. But for now, cheers!
Cheers. Ah, very good. That is a nice whiskey.